inshaAllah ta'ala. Okay, bismillah walhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's jump back in here. Bidāyat al-ʿābid wa kifāyat al-zahid by the great al-Allāmah Abdurrahman al-Ba'li al-Hanbali al-Qadiri rahimallahu ta'ala. Great Imam of ours, he opens up this chapter, Kitāb al-Ṣiyām. He says, وَهُوَ إِمْسَاكٌ بنية عن أشياء مخصوصة في زمن مخصوص من شخص مخصوص. وصوم رمضان يجب برؤية هلاله، فإن لم يرى مع صحو ليلة 30 من شعبان لم يصوموا، وإن حال دون مطلعه غيم أو قتر أو غيرهما وجب صيامه حكما ظنيا احتياطا بنية رمضان، ويجزئ إن ظهر منه، وتثبت أحكام الصوم من صلاة تراويح ووجوب كفارة بوطء فيه ونحوه ما لم يتحقق أنه من شعبان، ولا تثبت بقية الأحكام من نحو طلاق وإتاق والهلال المرئي نهارا لليلة المقبلة. Right away we jump into the topic of Ramadan and fasting. Fasting, the definition here essentially opens by saying it is refraining with intention from specified things in a specified time by a specified person. The fast of Ramadan is obligatory upon sighting its crescent. If it is not seen despite a clear night on the 30th of Sha'ban, they do not fast. If cloud, dust, or the like obstructs its rising, fasting is obligatory, presumptively and as a precaution with the intention of Ramadan, and it suffices if it later appears to have been of it. The rulings of fasting, such as Taraweeh and the obligation of expiation for intercourse during it and the like, apply so long as it has not been verified that it was of Sha'ban. The remaining rulings, such as divorce and manumission, do not. A crescent seen by day is for the coming night. All right, so let's look a little bit at some of what Imam al-Ba'li rahimahullah ta'ala is getting at here, unpacking some of this very dense legal language. When he says it is refraining, of course, we're talking about refraining or abstention in the general meaning of the word imsak. Imsak means to abstain. And we can find this usage of the linguistic word in Surah Maryam. Inni nadartu lirrahmani sawma. I have indeed vowed to the most merciful Ar-Rahman, sawma, abstention. Abstention here is when she was going to fast or abstain from speaking, not necessarily from food or drink. Legally in the Sharia, there's a technical meaning for sawm, and that is abstention with the intention from specific things during a specific time by a specific person. And essentially what we're talking about is the fast that we've all come to know in Ramadan, in which we do not eat, drink, or engage in intimate activity with the spouse and various other activities. From the true dawn, al-Fajr al-Thani, essentially when the Fajr Adhan is called, until the sun sets at Salat al-Maghrib, when the Adhan for that prayer is then called. And this, of course, is by a legally accountable Muslim. Legally accountable meaning pubescent and of sound mind, not menstruating, and not experiencing postnatal bleeding. So that obviously rules out a number of categories of people within that definition. It is one of the pillars of Islam, and it was made obligatory in the second year of the Hijrah, according to consensus, meaning the Prophet ﷺ fasted 9 Ramadans. All right? Fasting Ramadan becomes obligatory with the sighting of the crescent moon, as he mentions. if the crescent is not seen on the 30th night of Sha'ban with a clear sky, they do not fast the following day, which would be the 30th. Remember, the night comes before the day. That's how you start the day. You start the month at the night prior to. So the day, the 29th day, you would go out. This is the 29th of Sha'ban. You would go out in the evening just prior to Maghrib time. That would be the calendar switch. Not midnight as we've become accustomed in many places. 12 a.m. being the marker of the next day. The calendar changes the day. Our calendar, that little thing flops over at Maghrib time. So at the evening of the 29th, you would go out in order to sight the Ramaḍān moon, because potentially, as we know, the month is either 29 or 30 days. And so we'd go out there and we'd wait. And at Maghrib time, as Maghrib time comes in, is when you're able to see the crescent moon. And this is for every month of the year. You can see the crescent moon during that moment. And there's maybe a window of time, 15 to 20 minutes or so, that you're able to sight the moon, the birth of the new moon, if you will, in order to determine the beginning of the month. And so on the 29th day, the 30th night, technically, the 30th night could be the first night of Ramaḍān, concluding 29 days of Sha'ban and potentially now beginning Ramaḍān. Or it could be the 30th day of Sha'ban, meaning the following day by default would then be Ramaḍān, for all intents and purposes. Okay? So that's what he's saying. Is you're going to go out on the 29th or the 30th night of Sha'ban with a clear sky. If you don't see the crescent moon with a clear sky, then you don't fast the following day. This is the 30th of Sha'ban. If the sky is cloudy, the view is obstructed, dust, pollution, something that is blocking your view from potentially seeing the moon, you're unable to see the crescent due to this obstruction, then you have to fast with the intention of it being from Ramaḍān. And this is a precautionary ruling, an obligation based on dhann, not yaqeen. Dhann is an assumption. Yaqeen is certainty. The certainty is we saw for sure the moon. The assumption is it could be the moon. And this is based on the Hanabila's understanding of how you use the word in the hadith, فَقْدَرُوا لَهُ. Some people say, so calculate for it. There's a hadith that talks about you go out and you don't see it, then you calculate for it. Some people say it's used to calculate for it. And so then you count, okay, we didn't see it, so 29, 30 days, then we begin. But the Hanabila, they understand the word to mean restrict it. Much like it's used in the Quran. In Surah Al-Fajr, when he says that he will قَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقَهُ, that he will, qadara, use the same word, restrict his provision. He will restrict the servant's provision. And that's where the understanding of this practice or the supporting evidence for this practice comes from. Because I recognize that a lot of people don't understand the nature of this, or are like, wait a minute, that's Yom Shek. It's based on doubt. We're not allowed to fast on the day of doubt. In the Hanabila, the tradition of the Hanabila, Yom Shek would be when you went out on a clear night and you didn't see it. Clear sky, not obstructed, you didn't see it, so you decided to fast anyway. That's Yom Shek in the Hanabila. Right? I didn't see it because it was blocked. That's not what we're talking about here. It could be there. It's just there was a cloud in the way. It was dusty. There was atmospheric pollution. Smog was in the way. Now we can't see. It's very much possible that it is Ramaḍān. And so you begin the fast with this precautionary ruling based on assumption. The ruling of fasting, Tarawih prayer, and compensation in the event that someone broke their fast by way of intercourse during the daylight hours of Ramaḍān will apply in this case, even though it's based on a dhann, assumption. So long as it's not later proven that it was actually the 30th of Sha'ban. Meaning that later on in the month, you come to realize, oh, wait a minute, It's obvious that we started early because now we're not finishing as we should on the 29th or 30th. We're now going into the following day after that because we saw the moon and it was one day late, which means our calculation or our assumption was incorrect. And so those rulings would change there. The obligation for kafara would no longer apply. And the fast and the prayer that you would have offered would have now become something voluntary, not fulfilling an obligatory fast. But the prayer would still count as a voluntary prayer. The fast still is a voluntary fast, inshallah. The other rulings related to divorce or manumission or fulfillment of deferred debts or the ending of an iddah, a woman's waiting period, like, for example, after divorce, would not apply in this scenario because those rulings are based on yaqeen. So, if, for example, you said, on the first of the month, you're divorced. Or in the event that you had a bondservant, on the first of the month, you're free. You cannot base that, what you've tied it to an element of uncertainty. It has to be absolutely certain. So that's when those rulings would apply. Otherwise, we can't leave somebody in a situation in which there's uncertainty. Also, the same thing comes with debts. The debt is due on the first of the month. So in this case, this is hukm dhanni. We're doing this as a precautionary measure based on assumption. And so that day, it's not applicable here when it comes to calling in those debts to be repaid. If the crescent is sighted during the day, prior to sunset, whether before the beginning of the month or at the end, meaning if you were to happen to look out in the afternoon, sometimes we do, we'll see the moon out in the daytime based on, various different conditions of the celestial bodies and their placement, etc. If you go out and you happen to see a moon during the daylight hours, you don't act upon that. You don't fast based on that, so you don't go, oh, look, I saw the crescent, it's the daytime, I'm going to fast, it must be Ramadan. No, that's for the next cycle, the next night. The same thing goes if you saw it in the daytime at the end of the month and you go, oh, look, that must be the moon for Shawwal. It's in the middle of Ramadan. The day, you go, there's the moon, it must be Shawwal, so we're going to break our fast and start. No, it's not permitted to do that, to use that daytime sighting as a marker or a legal trigger. You have to wait until the appropriate time. He says, وَإِذَا ثَبَتَتْ رُؤْيَتُهُ بِبَلَدٍ لَزِمَ الصَّوْمُ جَمِيعَ النَّاسِ وَإِنْ ثَبَتَتْ نَهَارًا أَمْسَكُوا وَقَضَوْا يُقْبَلُ فِيهِ وَحْدَهُ خَبَرُ مُكَلَّفٍ عَدْلٍ وَلَوْ عَبْدًا أَوْ أُنْثَى أَوْ بِدُونِ لَفْظِ الشَّهَادَةِ وَلَا يَخْتَصُّ بِحَاكِمٍ وَتَثْبُتُ بَقِيَّةُ الْأَحْكَامِ ومن رآه وحده لشوال لم يفطر ولرمضان وردت شهادته لزمه الصوم وجميع الأحكام الشهر من طلاق وإتاق وغيرهما. All right, so this next section he continues. He says, if its sighting is established in a town, in one region, fasting is incumbent upon all people. If it is established by day, they withhold and then make it up. For establishing it alone, the report of a single upright, legally accountable person is accepted. For establishing it, we'll understand what he's talking about here shortly. This is one of the challenges of these legal manuals, especially the very short ones, is they speak in pronouns. It, you're like, what's it? What's he talking about it? What's he referring to? It, he, all that. They keep it very, in order to keep the text short, they use pronouns. They refer to it one time and then they just, it. So he might have talked about fasting like 5 pages back and he's still saying it is, he's talking about fasting. Or he's talking about Ramaḍān. 5 pages ago he said Ramaḍān and he's saying he's talking about Ramaḍān. And so that's one of the ways in which they keep these things quite succinct, but it's also one of the challenges in reading them and unpacking the very codified language. Right? So for establishing it alone, the report of a single upright, legally accountable person is accepted, even if a slave or a woman, and even without the wording of testimony. and it is not restricted to a ruler. In that case, the remaining rulings stand. One who alone cites it for Shawwal does not break his fast. And one who alone cites it for Ramaḍān and his testimony is rejected must fast, and all rulings of the month, including divorce and manumission and the like, apply to him. What does that mean exactly? What are we looking at? So if the crescent moon is cited for Ramaḍān in one region, everyone is required to fast. So here we clearly see the Hanabila, they have adopted the international moon sighting as the default and not the local moon sighting. That's essentially what happens. So in Islam, within the 4 schools of law, you have either one of 2 ways that you start Ramaḍān. It's either an international sighting or it's a local sighting. Okay? There is no other legal opinion that is widely accepted where you attach Ramaḍān to a certain region. And when that region starts, everyone else starts. If they don't start, no one starts. You understand what I'm saying? It's about when the moon's sighted, wherever it's sighted first, an authentic sighting by a credible witness. We've talked about credibility and witness recently. And we've talked about some of the cases in which your credibility where you would be rejected based on your credibility, how that comes into effect. So now we're talking about this issue here, another example of how this has an impact. Okay? So, one region cites it, one person in one region cites it, now it's binding upon everyone else to fast. And this is even with the agreement, if we were to agree, for argument's sake, on what they call ikhtilaf al-matali', which is an agreement that we understand that the moon can be sighted at different places first, meaning there's not an origin of its sighting. There's not one place in which it's sighted all the time. And that's how the moon is. Astronomically, so. It can be sighted in the eastern hemisphere first, and it can also be sighted in the western hemisphere first as well. Meaning that here, in our context of the United States, if the eastern hemisphere doesn't sight it, so like the majority of the Muslim world does not sight the crescent moon, which we typically hear of prior to our evening, it doesn't mean that Ramaḍān is not tomorrow. Because we still have a night. We still have a Maghrib time. We still have the potential of spotting the moon. Because the moon can be spotted when it's birthed, if you will, if we were to use that language. When it is birthed, the moon, it can happen anywhere around the globe. And it changes. Ikhtilaf al-matali'. It's reality. Which means you can't rely on the East for us here in the West and go, all right, they said there's no Ramaḍān tomorrow, so no Ramaḍān tomorrow. And we let everybody know it's 2 p.m. It's 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And we're going, hey, everybody's sending out messages. One more day, and then Ramaḍān the following day. We've pulled the trigger too early. We did not give it time to wait for us here in order to see, is the moon going to be sighted here? And if it's sighted here, then we have to act on it. We can't go off of what they've said. We have to go off of what we've said. The only time we would react and be bound by a report from the Eastern Hemisphere is when they report a positive moon sighting. If somebody from the Eastern Hemisphere says, the moon has been sighted, Ramaḍān's tomorrow, then at 2 p.m. when we receive the news, we can say, everybody, Ramaḍān's tomorrow. Positive moon sighting reported. It was recited in Mali. It was cited in Chad. It was cited in Sudan. It was cited in Morocco. It was cited in Kenya. It was cited in England. Or it was cited in Saudi Arabia. Any one of them, all of them, as long as the witness is credible, and we take even one witness. This is unique for Ramaḍān. One witness. That's all it takes. As long as they are a valid witness. So if the month begins with this valid witness, one witness, as long as they're morally accountable, meaning they have to be mukallaf, meaning pubescent and of sound mind, so you can't have a 7-year-old. Like this excludes mumayyiz, so from 7 up till puberty. Between that time, their witness is not acceptable. And also, their witness is not rejected. And they can't be mastur al-hal. Even that one, mastur al-hal means they're not publicly known to be sinners, but if somebody happens to know that, then that would invalidate their witness. And say, sorry, you're not a fitting witness. The gravity of such things needs to be on the shoulders of the righteous. But in today's time and place, obviously the standards have lessened for practical reasons. Right? It's just the way it is. And this is independent of their social status. So it doesn't matter where they are in their lot in life, whether they be free or in bondage, whether they be of leading class or not. Their witness will be accepted, whether they're male or female. It is of no consequence. And they don't have to give the witness in the wording of a testimony. Ash-shahada. Ashhadu. They don't have to give the proper phrasing in order for their witness to be accepted. They just have to convey the fact that they did see the crescent moon. The ruler also does not have to confirm the witness, as he mentions. It's not binding that the ruler be a part of this process. All of the associated rulings in that case are applicable based on this one witness, including the repayment of loans, divorce, manumission, everything else. All the other months, they require 2 upright men to testify to the new month, which means the end of Ramaḍān is not like the beginning. The beginning of Ramaḍān takes 1 witness, doesn't matter, as stipulated. The end of Ramaḍān, which basically means the beginning of the next month, the witness parameters have now changed back to the default. This means that if there was only 1 person to cite the crescent moon of Shawwal, they would not be permitted to break their fast, as he mentions explicitly in his text. However, if 1 person witnessed the crescent of Ramaḍān and their witness was rejected, such that their witness is not binding on anyone else, they themselves are required to fast and uphold all the associated rulings of the month because they saw with their own eyes the crescent moon. And so they have yaqeen. The reason why they can't establish that for everyone else is because their status puts a big question mark over them. They have a question mark. So just their status removes their credibility, meaning the potential for them to not be forthright. The next section here, he says, in the next فصل يجب على كل مسلم قادر مكلف ولكن على ولي صغير مطيق أن يأمره به ويضربه عليه ليعتاده ومن عجز عنه لكبر أو مرض لا يرجى برؤه أفطر وعليه لا مع عذر معتاد كسفر عن كل يوم لمسكين ما يجزئ في كفارة والسنة فطر وكره صوم بسفر قصر ولو بلا مشقة. It says here, these are talking about some obligations here. It is obligatory upon every capable Muslim of legal capacity. It is obligatory upon every capable Muslim of legal capacity. It is, however, upon the guardian of a capable minor to command them to fast and discipline them for neglecting it so that they become accustomed to the practice. Whoever is unable due to old age or chronic illness with no hope of recovery is to break the fast and must, unless accompanied by a common excuse such as travel, feed 1 poor person, the amount that suffices an expiation for each day. So that's where we'll stop for this section here. to talk a little bit about what he's saying. All right, fasting is obligatory upon the Muslims, not the non-Muslims. They are accountable for it, however. The non-Muslim, the person that's denied the faith, they are accountable in the madhab, according to the madhab, they are accountable for the rites, rituals, and obligations of the religion. Even though, meaning they're accountable for them in the next life, even though they're not obliged, essentially, it basically means that if they performed it, it would not be acceptable because they don't have the requisite intention. They don't have the faith in order to formulate an intention. And all acts of worship require an active intention. And that requisite to that is you have to be a believer. But it also means that they'll be held accountable for it in the hereafter. And that's why you have darakat in the hellfire. There are various different descending levels of hell. And based on these types of issues, that's how, like the darajat of Jannah, the ascending levels, based on what you did and, you know, the life that you lived, the spiritual endeavor, the religious practice, is what we understand from the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bestow upon you His grace and favor and place you based on those various factors. The same applies in opposite, in that the person who's denied faith, they have a multitude of things which would drive them further into hell. Of course, the worst of them being nifaq, a person that feigns Islam. Fi dark al-asfal min an-nar, as the Prophet said, they're in the lowest depths of the hellfire. So they're accountable for these obligations in the hereafter. The next thing he talks about is the Muslim has to be capable of fasting, which rules out those who are unable to fast, physically unable to fast. They must also be morally responsible to be obligated, which rules out the young, and of course those that are not of sound mind. Remember, moral responsibility is based on being pubescent and being of sound mind. And the young that are capable, just because they're not obliged or morally accountable for it, doesn't mean that they don't have to fast. For, he says, the parent or the guardian must command them to fast if they are capable of doing so. So they might not yet have reached puberty, but they might be like 10 or 11 or 12 years old, and you know perfectly well that they can handle fasting for the day. There's not going to be a problem with that. They might even start younger than that, have no problem whatsoever. Then they have to be ordered to fast and disciplined in the event that they don't, much like prayer. You start them off living a life of prayer before they're actually morally accountable for it. You start them off at the age of 7. They start praying. You discipline them by the age 10. And then by the time they reach puberty, now you have malaika writing the sins of those little youngsters that are not praying or not fulfilling the obligations of their prayer. So the parent or the guardian is supposed to develop, this is a part of the tarbiyah, the rearing of our young ones in Islam, is the parent needs to instill such practices in their kids at a young age, at an appropriate age. Note here, if they're capable of doing it, meaning you're not trying to force a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, or 4-year-old. You know somebody's unable to manage, their little tiny bodies are too fragile yet to embark upon such an exercise, and their minds just aren't well enough suited to even understand the nature of what they're doing. No, we're not being excessive and extreme. But at the same time, we're not being negligent and at fault by going, yeah, we'll just let them figure it out whenever they feel like it. I don't want to force it on them because I don't want them to reject it later in life. I want them to come to it on their own terms, and I'll just tell them they should do this, and then they get to decide how they're going to behave. 15-year-old gets to pick how they behave. 60-year-old gets to determine whether they pray or not, or put on their hijab as a girl or not, because the parents are being too timid and negligent. They think they're doing the right thing by way of their kids, but they're actually setting them up for failure. They're allowing the kid to diminish and minimize their religion and glorify having fun and relaxing and neglecting a spiritual life. So they grow up lopsided. And that will take hold in the heart, and it will eventually rear its ugly head later on. whether in this life or, more importantly and more to their detriment, in the next. Right? So the parent's job is to instill these practices and habits in their kids such that, he says, it develops a habit. It develops, they become accustomed to it. Not that they take worship as a habit, but that they become accustomed to it. It's a habitual worship. I have a habit of worship. And they become accustomed to that. This is my life. This is my identity. This is who I am. Ramadan comes. This is what we do. We fast. And then they're disciplined. If they give you a hard time about it, now we're in trouble. There's no choice. We're in trouble now. I know you can fast, and I catch you in the candy drawer, you're in trouble. I catch you sneaking, you're in trouble. Are you sinful? Alhamdulillah, not yet. But are you in trouble? It's my job, it's my duty as the parent to say absolutely, this is a big deal. This is important. Just like if you came home with a failing grade, for most parents that have their child's interest in mind, they would be upset. You came home and you had the police at the door because you shoplifted at the store. You would be upset. And the same thing goes for these types of issues. A parent has to take that responsibility seriously. It is their duty and their obligation. Then he goes on after that, and he says that for those who find it difficult to fast, and there's a number of different types here, but we focus on a few in this text. Firstly, due to old age. They find it difficult in their old age to fast. And for those incapable of fasting due to illness or sickness, such that if they were to fast, it would delay their recovery, or it would cause greater discomfort in their illness. That's the excuse of the one who's ill. So that rules out, like, I got a runny nose. I have a little runny nose. I got a little headache. We might say, oh, you're sick. Right? That's a type of sickness. But that type of sickness is not one which prevents you from fasting. Fasting is not going to exacerbate that level of sickness out of control or out of proportion. Those things can be easily managed. You got a little something. This isn't going to hurt you. It's not going to delay your recovery. It's not going to cause great discomfort or harm to you. You keep your fast. Okay? So here in this case, you're excused. But he also talks about someone who is incapable of fasting due to chronic illness. A chronic illness is one in which you do not expect to recover from. Typically, it might also be called a terminal illness. Like this is, you're going to live with this until you die. Like this illness is not, you're not recovering from this illness. So these two are put together. A person of old age who can't fast because it's difficult, or a person who has a chronic illness, they can break their fast in Ramadan, but they must give food to a poor person for every day they miss. And that way they're still participating. There's still a level of participation in the month. And the amount of food that they give is what would suffice for compensation, which is essentially one double-handed scoop, a mud of wheat, or two double-handed scoops of other staple foods, of rice. Two of these. Half a sa'a, which we talked about in the book of Zakat, chapter of Zakat. And this is the case for those two, unless they have another excuse which normally foregoes the obligation, like if they were traveling. So the chronically ill is now traveling, which permits you to break your fast. And we'll learn in the madhab it's actually preferred in this case to break your fast. Then on that day of travel, they're excused from that food. Otherwise, they continue to feed the poor person per day they missed. Or someone who is in their old age and they're fasting because they find it difficult due to their old age. Then in this case, they have a legitimate excuse that would normally apply and would forego the obligation. Then on that day, they're traveling, they say, yep, I don't have to pay the food on that day. It says, وَسُنَّ فِطْرٌ وَكُرِهَ سَوْمٌ بِسَفَرِ قَصْرٍ وَلَوْ بِلَا مَشَقَّةٍ وَكُرِهَ سَوْمُ حَامِلٍ وَمُرْضِعٍ خَافَةَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمَا أَوْ الْوَلَدِ وَيَقْضِيَانِ مَا أَفْطَرَتَاهُ وَيَلْزَمُ مَنْ يَمُونُ الْوَلَدَ إِنْ خِيفَ عَلَيْهِ فَقَطْ إِطْعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ لِكُلِّ يَوْمٍ وَيَجِبُ الْفِطْرُ عَلَى مَنْ احْتَاجَهُ لِإِنْقَاذِ مَعْصُومٍ مِنْ مَهْلَكَةٍ كَغَرَقٍ وَنَحْوِهِ. So it is recommended to break the fast, here he says, and disliked to maintain it while traveling a distance in which shortening of prayer is permitted, even if there is no hardship. It is also disliked for a pregnant or nursing woman to fast if she fears harm to herself or the child. Both must make up the days they missed. And if fear is only for the child, the one responsible for their care must also feed one poor person for each day. Breaking the fast is obligatory when needed to rescue a protected life from destruction such as a drowning person or the like. So in this section now, we're moving from the obligatory fast to when it's permissible to break your fast in exchange for a payment of food, and now when it's actually recommended to break your fast and when it's wajib to break your fast. So in the Hanbali school, it is recommended to break the fast when traveling the distance, which permits shortening prayer, even if there's no difficulty associated with the travel. Like you're in your car, you're on a bus, you're in business class, or better, luxurious travel, and you might be in more comfort than you are typically at home. In this case, it's recommended to break the fast. Disliked, actually, to maintain it while traveling. So, technically, could you fast? Yes, you could. Within the school, makruh, the legal ruling of it is that you're not sinful for doing it, but it's better and rewarding if you don't. But if you, for example, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because some people are of the nature that if I miss a day, I'm worried I might not make it up. Because my fasts are limited to Ramaḍān. I only fast in Ramaḍān, and if I miss a day, I'm out of the momentum, and I could end up missing it the next Ramaḍān, in which there's a way in which you have to deal with that. Not only is it sinful, but then you have to pay an expiation for it. So in this case, a person could technically, they could fast while they're traveling to maintain that momentum and continue throughout the month. However, it is recommended to break fast, disliked to maintain it within the madhab. It is also disliked for a pregnant or nursing woman to fast if they fear for themselves or their child, meaning they fear for their health or for the health of their child. So a pregnant woman obviously may be concerned about her personal health. Fasting may take a toll on her physically, and while she's pregnant, that's exacerbated because now her body is in more need than it typically is. And they're considered to be like the sick person in that way, in that case. And they say, actually, it's even more so for them. Min bab al-awla, right? This is even more so the case for a pregnant woman or a woman that's nursing, right? Because their body is requiring much more nourishment in order to maintain and sustain a second life. So the woman might be worried about her personal health, but then she might break the fast because, well, I'm fine fasting, but I'm worried that the child is not going to get the proper nourishment because the calorie intake is not where it needs to be, and I'm not I'm not taking care of that or replenishing that at night. And this would require perhaps some professional consultation in order to determine the right course of action here. If a person is not certain about these issues in terms of a medical excuse, it may require some consultation. Or a woman that's breastfeeding the child, and this could be the mother or it could be another woman. That's why we have to take a note here that for if she fears harm to herself or the child, not her child. Because a woman could be breastfeeding another's child. Okay, it could be her child, of course, that's typical. She's the one breastfeeding, she's the mother. But it could also be a woman that's breastfeeding another child. And the woman that's breastfeeding that child may think, look, if I start fasting, my milk supply is going to dry right up. That's who I am. I'm that type of woman. I have an unstable milk supply that once my calorie intake drops for too long, if I go 5 or 6 hours without upping the calories to produce the milk starts to dry up. It starts to become very, very, the quality of it begins to diminish, right? Because that mother's milk is, that's the best thing for them. It's the best thing for those kids. Those babies need that. It provides more than we know. You can never replace that mother's milk. There's no type of formula that's going to give you what that mother's milk gives. But the mother's milk depends greatly on the woman's personal care for herself in order to have a good diet and a good level of calories in order for the body to produce. And every woman is different here in this regard, according to what I've understood. I am not trying to mansplain this issue. But based on what I've read and studied from those that know more than most and have shared this information through experience, every woman has a different type of milk supply that they would know. This is what happens. And so the woman may say, hey, if I stop eating for more than 5 or 6 hours and I do that regularly, then my milk supply starts to diminish, the quality of the milk starts to diminish, and eventually I'm not going to have really anything of substance or anything at all to offer this child. So in that case, because of the child's welfare and their health, I'm going to break my fast. They are both to make up the days they missed. If the woman broke her fast out of concern for the child alone, whether pregnant or breastfeeding, whoever is responsible for the child is required to feed a poor person for each day they missed, while the woman is only responsible to make up the days of fasting, which would typically be the father of that child is the one that's responsible for that child. In the event that the father had passed away, well, then the next person after that, it might be the grandfather, is now financially responsible for that child, and they're going to be the ones that pay to feed that poor person for the days that the woman missed who broke her fasts only for the sake of that child. In the event that she broke her fast for herself, or herself and the child, in that case, there is no food that has to be paid. There's no concern about paying here. If she broke her fast for the sake of the child and herself, or just herself, then we're off the hook for that payment. And then he talks about the obligation of breaking the fast. He says it's an obligation to break the fast during Ramaḍān in the event that there is a requirement to do so in order to save a life of a sacred human being from demise, such as drowning or burning or something, and you're required to now ingest something. In order to do that, then you're obliged to break the fast. This also applies to someone who's involved in very difficult work that could potentially undergo tremendous harm. Fearing for their demise, they would break their fast and then they would make it up later. He says, وَشُرِطَ لِكُلِّ يَوْمٍ وَاجِبًا نِيَّةٌ مُعَيَّنَةٌ مِنَ اللَّيْلِ وَلَوْ أَتَى بَعْدَهَا بِمُنَافٍ لَا نِيَّةُ الْفَرْضِيَّةِ وَيَصِحُّ صَوْمُ نَفْلٍ مِمَّنْ لَمْ يَفْعَلْ مُفْسِدًا بِنِيَّتِهِ نَهَارًا وَلَوْ بَعْدَ الزَّوَالِ وَيُحْكَمُ بِالصَّوْمِ الشَّرْعِيِّ المثاب عليه من وقتها وَمَنْ خَطَرَ بِقَلْبِهِ لَيْلًا أَنَّهُ صَائِمٌ غَدًا فَقَدْ نَوَى وَكَذَا الْأَكْلُ وَشُرْبُ بِنِيَّةِ الصَّوْمِ. Now we're talking about the intention here. The Imam says, for every obligatory fast, a specific intention must be made at night, even if something contrary occurs thereafter, though the intention of obligation itself is not required. A voluntary fast is valid when intended during the day, even after midday, so long as no invalidator has been committed beforehand. Such a fast is deemed a legally recognized act of worship from the moment of intention. Whoever's heart resolves by night to fast the next day has intended, and likewise eating or drinking with the intention of fasting suffices as intention. It's great stuff here. Very important. Hanbali school. Hanbali school is very important. Yes. Right? So that's what I advise. This is the Hanbali school. And forget all the other ones. No, just joking. No, I'm just joking. You're ready to make that commitment. No. I mean, but hey, you know what I mean? Officially, but unofficially, yeah. Full dedication. All right. The Hanbali school, in the Hanbali school, the intention to fast is an obligation that must be fulfilled at some point in the night. The intention here, the niyyah. And we're talking about this because there's another view that says you can have one intention from the beginning of the month that covers you for every day of the month. You just have one intention that starts, and then it's like a full month intention. But here, the Hanabila, they say, no, you require an intention every night before the day begins. This must be done for every day of Ramadan, whether it be a fast performed on time or a fast that's made up later, meaning qada. And so after Ramadan, you got a couple days. The intention has to be made prior to Fajr al-Thani, the time in which the adhan is called for Fajr. Or it's a fast that's been obligated by way of an oath, a nadhr, or one that's being performed as an expiation, right? Sometimes there's expiations you pay by way of fasting. And so these are obligatory fasts, and an obligatory fast requires an intention prior to the beginning of the day. And in the school, this is justified by understanding that each day of fasting is its own independent act of worship. And they understand that because if you invalidate one day, if you break a fast on one day, it doesn't spoil the previous or following day. Meaning there's not a chain. They're not chained together such that I broke my fast on the 15th of the month, which means now the previous 14 days are now broken, and the next subsequent 14 days or 15 days are now broken. Because one intention, you see, one intention has been nullified, because essentially that's a major part of Sawm is a niyyah. All right, so once you've invalidated the niyyah, then that act itself entirely is lost. And so you have to have a separate niyyah for each day. They understand that based on how it was applied during the life of the Prophet ﷺ. What was happening? They missed a day. They only have to make up that one day, which means they must have had an intention on each day. That's where they get that from. And then what happens if it's not an obligatory fast? It is a voluntary fast. The intention could be made at any point during the daytime. The intention could be made at any point during the daytime. But before we get that, I missed one piece here. When he says, even after, though the intention of obligation itself is not required, right? Which means you don't have to say, I intend to fast Ramadan, because you do have to have a specific intention. I intend to fast Ramadan as an obligation. I do intend to make up Ramadan fast as an obligation. I do intend to fulfill this fast by way of oath as an obligation. Because the obligation part is built into the fact that it's Ramadan. So your intention to fast a day in Ramadan doesn't also need to be supercharged with as an obligation. Because fasting Ramadan is not a voluntary act. So when you say I'm fasting Ramadan, it's not understood that this is an option. It means you're fulfilling a duty. So that's what he means when he says that there. Then when it comes to the following day, if a person were to wake up for a voluntary action, I should not say a following day, but he wakes up in the day, the following day of that night, when he should have intended, but it's a voluntary fast, then it's in that case that they can make an intention during the daytime. Even after zawal, which is after dhuhr, meaning like, most of the day is gone, you can make an intention to fast at asr time, so long as you have not done anything that would typically invalidate your fast. Meaning, I haven't eaten, I haven't had anything to drink, I haven't done anything else, or otherwise, I haven't done anything else to invalidate it. Typically that'd be the case. You have a wife that you've, been alone with. And you go, I might as well fast. I mean, I've gotten this far. I might as well take advantage of the next 3, 4, 5 hours and just get the reward of fasting, which would begin at that moment. So you wouldn't be rewarded for the entire day because the intention was missing. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. You intended to wake up without fasting, so you're not going to get rewarded for fasting, having not intended it. But at that moment, say like 3 o'clock, you go, hey, I haven't had anything, I might as well fast. So from 3 until Maghrib time, you'll be rewarded for an active fast. Again, if you realized, hey, I did have breakfast, but I didn't have lunch. That's called intermittent fasting, Habibi. That's not for worship. That's just for diet purposes, health. Recommended, sure, but not as an act of worship. And then he highlights what the intention looks like. He says, whoever's heart resolves, مَنْ خَطَرَ بِقَلْبِهِ, whoever's heart resolves, laylan, at night, أَنُّ صَائِمٌ غَدًا, that he's going to fast tomorrow, فَقَدْ نَوَى, then he has made the intention. And that highlights where the intention occurs. It occurs in the heart. So it's not required for you to utter the intention. And he says, وَكَذَا الْأَكْلُ وَالشُّرْبُ بِنِيَّةِ الصَّوْمِ. So in the event that at night you're eating and you're drinking, and you're doing that because, look, I'm going to fast tomorrow. I need to fuel up. I need to put some in the storage chamber. You know what I mean? I'm having sahur. He says, بِنِيَّةِ الصَّوْمِ. Then this is an indicator that your intention has been made. The food and drink is not the intention. To be clear, the food and drink that you're doing is an indication that the intention is there, because that's why you're doing this. It's not like you got the munchies in the middle of the night and you're raiding the cabinet for chocolates and snacks. Yeah. No, I'm up because I got to fast. Very different. The next part, فَصْلٌ وَمَنْ أَكَلَ أَوْ شَرِبَ. This is the last part we're looking at for the day. مَنْ أَكَلَ أَوْ شَرِبَ أَوْ اكْتَحَلَ بِمَا عَلِمَ وصوله إلى حلقه من كحل ونحوه أو أدخل إلى جوفه شيئا أو وجد طعم علك مضغه بحلقه أو وصل إلى فمه نخامة فابتعلها أو استقاء فقاء أو كرر النظر فأمنى أو استمنى أو قبل أو لمس أو باشر دون الفرج فأمنى أو أمذى أو حجم أو احتجم وظهر دم عامدا مختارا ذاكرا لصومه أفطر لا بفصل وشرط ولا إن فكر فأنزل ولا إن فعل شيئا من جميع المفطرات ناسيا أو مكرها ولا إن دخل ماء مضمضة أو استنشاق حلقه ولو بالغ أو زاد على 3 ولا إن دخل الذباب أو الغبار حلقه بغير قصد ولا إن جمع ريقه فابتلعه. All right, we're talking about the fast invalidators. He's going to list things and categorize them for us in a very, very tight passage. Whoever eats, drinks, or applies eyeliner, kuhl, that is known to reach the throat, eyeliner, and the like, or inserts anything into their body, or detects in their throat the taste of gum or mastic they have chewed, or allows phlegm that has reached the mouth to enter the throat, or deliberately induces vomiting and vomits, or repeatedly gazes until ejaculation of orgasmic fluid, or masturbates, or kisses, or touches, or engages in intimacy short of intercourse and ejaculates either orgasmic or pre-orgasmic fluid, or performs cupping, or has it performed upon them and blood appears, if done deliberately, by choice, and while aware of the fast, then the fast is broken. It is not broken by bloodletting through incision or opening of a vein. Ejaculation from mere thought, doing any ejaculation of orgasmic fluid from mere thought, doing any of the nullifiers forgetfully or under compulsion. Water from rinsing the mouth or nose reaching the throat. This is during wudu, al-madmada wal-istinshaq, when you wash your mouth and you rinse your nose. Even if exaggerated. An exaggerated way we've talked about before is when you bring water in the mouth and you swish it around so that it reaches all areas of the mouth, not just part of the mouth. Or when you inhale water and you inhale it to the back of the nose, exaggerating that. Or you do it more than 3 times, which is the recommended number. If you were to do that and were to ingest water, the fast is not invalidated. A fly or dust entering the throat unintentionally, or swallowing one's own gathered saliva in the mouth also does not invalidate the fast. All right, so let's talk about this briefly before we conclude for this session. He says, whoever eats, drinks, or applies kuhl. Eating and drinking we obviously understand. That's very clear. You're ingesting something, no doubt about it. Kuhl or eyeliner or other similar substances such as drops, sprays, or vapors. Things that you would put in your eye, knowing that it reaches the throat. And that's whether it's because it's moist or it is absorbed and reaches the throat, will invalidate the fast. Right? So we know that the ears, nose, and throat are connected, but the eyes are as well. You can ask your eye doctor, and I've confirmed this with the medical professionals, that is it possible that an eye drop or an eyeliner can get into the throat? And there's confirmation from modern medical professionals today. Absolutely. These things are connected. And so if you apply that and it does get into the throat, then it will invalidate the fast. Same thing goes for vapors and sprays. Putting up a spray, a nostril spray, or a puffer, inhalers, right? If that gets into the throat, which is what it's meant to do, or if it gets into the brain, like an inhaler, a puffer for the nose, it might not get into the throat, but it could potentially get into the brain because there is a barrier. This is also, you can look this up in modern science today. There is a barrier that surrounds the brain and it protects it from cross-contamination of bodily fluids. But there is a possibility that something can penetrate through that membrane, can seep into the brain. And they talk about that in more expansive works of the school. So here, anything that gets in, as I mentioned, through the eye or goes into the body like this, it will invalidate the fast. And the same thing applies to inserting anything into the body cavity, what's called as al-Jawf, the cavity of the body which reaches the stomach. So not like a muscular issue where you would inject something into your muscle. That's not going to reach the jowf. Okay? But if you inserted something into your body by way of, coming into your mouth or your rear end or even your urethra, in which it could make its way up into the internal cavity of the body, through the ear canal as well. Sometimes you could put a drop and it'll end up in your throat. Then in that case, regardless of where it entered, even if you were to open the body through an incision and insert something in there like IV bags, etc., they'll put you on an IV, bro, and you got to go to the bathroom in like a couple of hours. I mean, they'll pump you up with all kind of fluids, and now it's in your system, right? So those things would end up breaking your fast. Imagine that, somebody going, I'm not going to eat or drink, but I'm going to get an IV bag, so I can keep the hydration going. Yeah, I laid in the hospital for days. I didn't need anything but that IV bag. They'll keep you going with that stuff. All right, so any way it comes in the body, it would at any entry point. All right, the next part is if a person tastes the flavor of mastic, chewing gum that they had previously been chewing, and it reaches the throat. Now here, it's important to note, it will break the fast. This does not permit you to chew gum that has flavor agents in it. There's the difference between what they're referring to in these books, al-ʿilk, which is like a type of gum that has no flavoring. It's a naturally occurring substance. It's not something that's chemically or produced in a factory where you get all of these sugars and sweeteners and mint flavors and peppermint flavors and, taste the rainbow. Those flavor agents that come out, they will certainly break the fast if they reach the throat, and it's impermissible to even chew them and try to avoid swallowing the saliva that's now been mixed with those things. But for that naturally occurring, that it's almost a tasteless gum, if there is a taste that's produced from that and you swallow it, then you will have broken the fast. You will have broken the fast. Imagine chewing on a piece of paper, for example, and you get a flavor from that paper, which there is, and you ingest it, ma-salama. Similar to that is phlegm, which reaches the mouth, regardless of its origin. So it might be from the sinus, it could be from the throat, it could be from the chest, a person that's having a little phlegm issue. If you were to cough up phlegm and it gets into the mouth, we have to remember that the mouth is considered min al-Kharij. It's from the external part of the body. It's not internal. And so when something is brought into the external part, it cannot now be reinserted. You cannot swallow that phlegm. That might be off-putting to some people to think that they would swallow their phlegm, but it does happen. Right? There might be situations where that happens. And if it's intentionally swallowed, then it would break your fast. You have to spit that out. This is very different from saliva. We all understand saliva is naturally occurring in the mouth, constantly producing saliva. And the reason that you're permitted to swallow that without it invalidating your fast is because it's simply too hard to manage it otherwise. It's considered a concession, because it's too difficult to manage constantly producing saliva and having to spit that out all the time. Otherwise, it would be considered the same thing, because it is outside, and if you swallowed it, it would technically break your fast. But due to the difficulty surrounding that, it's not considered. It's overlooked. If one induces vomiting, meaning they intentionally push the eject button or get themselves to vomit, and vomit exits the body, this will break the fast. If they are overwhelmed by it and they vomit, not by choice, then it won't break the fast. Again, it has to be done by decision. And it doesn't matter what comes out, right? What comes out of the body. If you induce vomiting, whether it's like food or bile or phlegm or blood or anything else that comes out, even if it's in a small amount, the fast will be broken. The next part has to do with repeated glances. Note here, we have to note here, the specificity being used here. Repeated glances, meaning you're looking at something. Either you're staring or you're just looking at this object of desire, which would lead to ejaculation. فَأَمْنَى, he says, أَوْ كَرَّرَ النَّظَرَ فَأَمْنَى, which means that leading to ejaculation of orgasmic fluid, the fast is invalidated. However, if ejaculation occurs without repeated glancing, meaning just from one look, and your body reacted to that in that manner, because we know you're forgiven for that one unintentional look. You're pardoned for that. But if you were so charged up that by that one look it led to ejaculation of orgasmic fluid, then in that case you would be excused. Or if it was resulted in medhi, which is the pre-orgasmic fluid, the fast is not broken. Any form of self-stimulation, whatever type, whatever is being utilized in order to lead to that conclusion, whether it is orgasmic or pre-orgasmic fluid, the fast will be broken. Likewise, that ruling applies to a person that is kissing another, touching another, or engaging in intimate acts short of intercourse. So like what we would call foreplay, and ejaculation of either orgasmic or pre-orgasmic fluid occurs, the fast is invalidated. And I'm using orgasmic and pre-orgasmic for a reason, because it is occurring in both men and women, as opposed to saying like seminal fluid, which would be like typically associated with males. Women aren't off the hook with this either, because they also are noted for having a type of fluid that is released during these sensual moments. If a person undergoes bloodletting and blood exits the body, the fast is also broken. Bloodletting meaning cupping here, hijama in particular, and that's where you would take a glass like this, without, of course, this beautiful ginger and turmeric tea, and you would put it on the body. Normally you have to put a little fire in there, yep, or a little paper, and they light it, and then they stick it on the body, and it creates a vacuum. I've had it done in Medina in a number of places, and what it does is it creates a suction on this thing such that the blood is drawn to the top of the skin, and then the one that is doing the hijama, typically you're not doing it on yourself. You could in certain places that you could reach and manage, but the one doing it would then make small incisions for the blood to be drawn out, and then put this back on. Drop the little fire in there, put it back on. The fire obviously extinguishes quickly because of the lack of oxygen, but what it does is it creates a vacuum, which now pulls the blood out of the body, brings all that blood out of the body, and then it's collected in the cup, and then it's disposed of. So that's hijama. The Prophet ﷺ, he prescribed that for medicinal reasons. As a prophetic medicine, hijama is utilized, and there are various different scenarios in which that would be. Various different parts of the body they've associated with certain ailments, and so to utilize that would be to attempt a means by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would provide you a cure. That's one thing we have to remember, that these things are means that you utilize, and it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that ultimately is the one that cures. Utilizing the means. And a person of faith doesn't get caught up in the means. They don't get caught up with the means. You might employ them, and that's why in the madhab al-Hanabila, al-madhab al-Hanbali, they say that seeking medical intervention is permissible. وَتَرْكُ أَوْلَى. Not taking it is preferred if you're doing it tawakkulan ala Allah. You're doing it as an act of trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because of the level of real trust based on your belief, your iman, knowing that Abdul Qadir Asidi Abdul Qadir Jilani, he said that you people are getting too attached to the means, the asbab. Don't bother yourself with these asbab. Don't make a big deal over these means, because there is no fa'il ghayrullah, no doer other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like he says, it's not the sword that cuts. It's Allah that cuts by the sword. It's not the fire that burns. It's Allah that burns by the fire. And that's why Ibrahim alayhi salam could go into the fire and come out unscathed. Abraham could go into the fire and come out unburned. Because it's not the fire that has the power to burn. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's utilizing that as a means. And so when Allah doesn't want to utilize that as a means, it doesn't burn anything. Just a little spiritual reflection there here when we're talking about hijama and medical treatment and bloodletting. That doesn't mean that it doesn't impact the ruling of fasting, regardless of if it has a positive or negative impact on your sickness. It's still going to invalidate your fast. And the unique thing about hijama is that the one that has it done and the one that does it, their fast will be broken. Okay, it's very unique, and it sets a precedent for us that we understand this is shay ta'abbudi. It's something done purely devotional. There's no clear. It's not that there's no wisdom. There's no wisdom that is clear to us in order to make qiyas. If it was about the blood, we would say the one who's removing the blood, their fast is broken, but why is the one who's doing it fast broken? There's obviously something here beyond just the act itself. There's something happening there, and this is why they consider this shay ta'abbudi. Something that's purely devotional. We can't make qiyas on it. And for that reason, he says bloodletting via incision or opening a vein, like if you had to get a surgery or something and blood came out, that's very different than bloodletting, because you're not doing the hijama. All of these rules, all of the above, only apply when done intentionally, meaning the person consciously chooses to perform the act. They're aware that they're fasting, and they're not doing it under duress, meaning they're not being forced to do it. And the fast is still considered broken in those cases, even if the person is unaware that it is prohibited. They do it knowingly, intentionally. They do it without being under duress. They choose to do it, etc. While knowing that they're fasting, even if they don't know that this is haram to do, the fast has still been broken. So long as they knew they were fasting and they deliberately did the act, they have to make up the day. Then, of course, there are things here that he mentions that don't break the fast, as I alluded to, incision, opening veins, etc. And then, of course, we can understand that if a person did any of these things forgetfully or under compulsion, then the fast will remain valid. So, like, if somebody stopped by the water fountain in Ramaḍān, not realizing or remembering that they were fasting and took a sip, and they go, oh, I'm fasting, the fast is still valid. Any of those things, any of them, regardless of the nature of them, the level of extremeness of those acts, if done under duress or not fasting, not aware, forgetful, then the fast remains valid. Even if you ate a whole meal, as we've heard before. Even if you ate twice. You had breakfast and lunch, and you forgot both times you were fasting. You had breakfast. And then you went, oh, subhanAllah, I'm fasting. You had a whole breakfast. Then your fast is still valid. And then by lunchtime you forget and you eat a whole lunch, the whole meal. And then moments after you're done you go, oh, I'm fasting. The fast is still valid. Yeah, you just got to have, Allah just gave you a breakfast and a lunch, a freebie right there. And your fast is still going to count for you, as if you never did it. Other things like backbiting, slander, gossip, though they're sinful and can detract from the reward of your fast, they do not break the fast. Imam Ahmad was noted to have said, if backbiting invalidates the fast, then we would not have a valid fast. And Ibn Qudamah mentioned this as a consensus. And then, of course, as you know, we concluded with, Imam al-Ba'li concludes with issues of madmada, istinshaq, making wudu, etc., which I already covered in enough detail for us to understand what was intended by that. And then I think obvious, if something were to get into your throat like a fly or a bug or some dust and you unintentionally ingested that, that of course would not break the fast either. And then the last thing he notes is someone collecting saliva in their mouth. This is considered makruh in Ramaḍān. to let the saliva pool in your mouth and then swallow it, as if like I'm going to drink something, it's disliked, right? You can understand why, but it's not going to invalidate the fast because the saliva in general is overlooked. And that's where we're going to wrap up for today. Jazakallah khair for your attention and your attentive listening and your patience. Until next time, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.